Elected by her peers at the 2012 General Convention, the Reverend Gay Clark Jennings is the first ordained woman to hold the position of President of the House of Deputies. Gay was ordained a priest in 1979 and previously served for 17 years as canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of Ohio, and for 9 years as Associate Director of Credo Institute, a church wellness program. Gay has served the Episcopal Church in many ways, including a term on Executive Council and multiple committees and commissions. She is a founding steering committee member of the Chicago Consultation, which supports the inclusion of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Christians. Gay is a graduate of Colgate University and the Episcopal Divinity School. She lives in Sagamore Hills, Ohio, with her husband Albert, who has been a parish priest for 35 years. Their son Sam lives nearby and is a sound engineer, and their beloved daughter Lee died in 2010. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Gay Clark Jennings.
My name's Gay Jennings, and I'm an Episcopalian, and I thank God you are too. Thank you, Bishop Catherine, for those wise words, and thank you, let's see, Will and Doug and Bishop Charlie for inviting me to join you today. I'm honored to come back now for the third time to be with you here in the Episcopal Church in South Carolina. And please also know how much I appreciate the efforts of Warren, Barb, and Dave, and Doug, who planned this day and were remarkably attentive to details and being hospitable. I offered to talk about leadership in challenging times, but while I've been thinking about those remarks, it has occurred to me more than once that here in South Carolina, you already know more than a few things about leadership in challenging times. You are persevering through legal, financial, logistical, spiritual, and practical challenges, and your enthusiasm, grace, and dignity in the face of it all inspires me and many other deputies and leaders around the church. So I am so grateful for your service and your commitment to our common life. You are the epitome of what it means to be an enthusiastic Episcopalian. So give yourselves a hand. When I think about what it means to lead in challenging times, I sometimes go back to Paul Tillich, the great 20th century theologian who wrote about being at the boundary, both existentially and culturally. And if in the manner of true confessions, frankly, it's one of the few systematic theological principles I've retained since I graduated from seminary 37 years ago. In his interpretation of history, he wrote, "The borderline is the truly propitious place for acquiring knowledge. It has been my fate in almost every direction to stand between alternative possibilities of existence, to be completely at home in neither, to take no definitive stand against either. As fruitful as such a position is for thought, since thinking presupposes receptiveness to fresh possibilities, it is difficult and dangerous for life, which steadily demands decisions and thus exclusions of alternatives. From this disposition and these tensions have come both destiny and task." In so many ways, all of us who are leading today's church, and I mean all of us here in this room and others spread across this Episcopal Church, and whether we are 18 or 88, We are all standing on a boundary line that marks the end of the old institutional church and the beginning of what the church of the 21st century is becoming. And it is our job, it is our vocation, it is, thank you, Will, our appointment to stand on that boundary and help others cross. Some of us, like Moses, won't get there ourselves. Others of us are becoming the leaders who will turn that hope into reality. But all of us are on that boundary together. And Jesus teaches us that we belong there. In Luke 17:11-19, he's on the boundary. From Luke. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. I'm intrigued by the notion of Jesus on the border between Samaria and Galilee. Jesus was often on the border between the old and the new, between death and new life, between the old covenant and the new covenant, between the cultural norms of the time and an expansive notion and understanding of who is worthy and who has value. So in this story, Jesus is walking between his homeland, Galilee, and Samaria. Now, Samaritans and Jews, as you know, lived in a tension fueled by hundreds of years of bitterness and rivalry. They had the same ancestors and once were united under one king, the great King David. After Solomon died, the kingdom split and a border was created. And so Jesus, in this story, is walking the border of what was once united and is now divided. And you'll note that he walked that border on the way to Jerusalem, the holy city, the city where he would be crucified, die, and be resurrected. So I take that to mean that we are called to walk that border as well, the border that eventually leads to resurrection and new life. Jesus teaches us that leadership is a choice you make. Leadership is a choice you make rather than a position you occupy. And Jesus chose to be on that border between Samaria and Galilee, just as you choose to be here in the Episcopal Church in South Carolina. When I look around the church today, sometimes I see nothing but borders. Some are true Good Friday sites, like the horror of violence in South Sudan, and the plight of people scourged, enslaved by the scourge of human trafficking. Some are the boundaries of racism and discrimination that we place between us, or those we allow to remain where history has placed them. And some are boundaries between the world we know and the world we face, the future that we face. Now, as we approach next summer's, it's kind of hard to believe, but next summer's General Convention again, we're standing on a boundary between the church we used to be and the church we're called to be, the church that God is calling us to be. And perhaps that sounds familiar to you here in the Episcopal Church in South Carolina, because of course you are standing on that border between the church you used to be and the church God is calling you to be, which Bishop Charlie spoke of so eloquently. In the summer of 2012, the General Convention of the Episcopal Church gathered in Indianapolis. And unlike the past decade, well, actually, truthfully, it was more than a decade, of high stakes, high-profile wrangling over issues of justice and human sexuality. The hot topic at that convention, who knew, was structure, not sex, for a change. The jockeying over structural reform proposals that led up to convention was a politically fraught process that no one would recommend or seek to replicate. It tapped into our worst fears and too often our worst selves. Some battled over structure under the guise of budget debates or restructuring by defunding. Some became convinced that old-time senior deputies like me would preserve their own power by refusing to change anything about the church's structure. Others pointed to a massive proposal for reform unveiled at a House of Bishops meeting held in Ecuador as proof positive that bishops intended to take over the church and disenfranchise clergy and lay people. Not surprisingly, everyone's fears were overblown. But it's also not surprising that people got worked up about the issue. Governance and structure establish nothing less than how people in community, in this case we the people of the Episcopal Church, choose to order our life together. Our governing documents, the Book of Common Prayer, the Constitution and canons, the less well-known rules of order and bylaws, provide the foundational principles for the ways in which we carry out God's mission in the world. And this grassroots energy and commitment to restructuring that I see across the church is a hallmark of strong leadership in challenging times. But it's also what makes our debate about structure so electric. I think that our passions about restructuring are the evidence that we know the church that many of us once knew is coming to its end. And some of us, as Bishop Charlie said, are grieving that loss, and some of us are being liberated by it. And I imagine you know just what I mean. So what questions should we be asking as leaders as we consider how to lead the Episcopal Church during this time of great change? Because in fact, you have two layers of great change in this diocese. The fact of what's happened in the last decade in terms of the realignment, as well as the debate happening on a church-wide level. Around the church, I hear clergy and lay leaders wondering how we can support relationships and networks around the church without a large, unsustainable corporate hierarchy. How do we continue to conserve our treasures, buildings like this beautiful building, fabric and fine arts, and the remarkable work of the archives of the Episcopal Church? How do we do that without becoming overseers of museums? How can we reorganize our diocese and our relationship with such entities as the Church Pension Fund? Thank God for the Church Pension Fund, by the way. And I think there's a few clergy here receiving monthly checks, yes? Thank God. But how can we reorganize our relationships with such entities as the Church Pension Fund, our seminaries, so that their important work is being done in the context of the church of the 21st century? As we seek hopeful answers to those and many other restructuring questions, I believe it is essential that we maintain our character as a church in which lay people, clergy, and bishops share authority. You know what it's like when that somehow becomes not the norm. At times, restructuring General Convention, Executive Council, and our committees and commissions, agencies, and boards has been the third rail of Episcopal politics. To some, it's been obvious that our sometimes bloated and duplicative governance needs to be restructured. To others, however, proposals to streamline have sounded like attempts to depart radically from this shared ministry and distributed authority that is embedded in our Episcopal DNA. Most senior deputies can tell you with little or no prompting, and a senior deputy is one who has attended at least 7 general conventions, that the House, most of them can tell you that the House of Deputies is the senior house, founded in 1785, and that the House of Bishops did not join the General Convention until the Third Convention convened in 1789. When deputies do this, when they refer to the House of Bishops as the junior house, it can sound like hidebound attachment to ancient history or refusal to compromise. But too often in the structured debate, we forget our church's long history of clergy and lay people who have urged, cajoled, and sometimes forced the church to move ever closer to God's reign of mercy and justice. So without shared governance, we might not have progressed as we have towards the equality of women, people of color, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Christians. Without the shared leadership of deputies and bishops, we might not have achieved our prophetic stands on the death penalty. We are the denomination with the longest standing official opposition to the death penalty, and the General Convention went on record in 1956. But also our prophetic stands on racism, gun control, and poverty, or been able to carry forward our church-wide work towards justice and peace. Without shared governance and authority, we would not have been able to step over the boundary line in many contexts and communities. And without shared authority, you all would not be able to reclaim the honorable work and history of the Episcopal Church in South Carolina. As Episcopalians, our fundamental value of shared leadership extends, in fact, far beyond governance to the core of the mission that governance makes possible. In her seminal book, We Are Theologians, Deputy Frederica Harris Thompson writes, historically, laity have brought essential gifts to Christian societies and institutions. They have been successful organizers, pushing the frontiers of Christian mission beyond the confines of parochialism and denominationalism. They have identified pragmatic needs for reform and social welfare, shaping institutions and occupations accordingly. Lay people have broadened our social understanding, expressing diversity as a fact of life and not a problem to be solved. They teach us that churches are impoverished and even imperiled when they ignore the ministries of women and youth. Thompson reminds us why structure conversations can so easily become pitched battles. When we talk about structure as if it will save us or kill us, we are not really talking about structure. We are talking about how our identity and our vision for the future could become impoverished and imperiled if we lose sight of the gifts that all orders of ministry offer. We are asking who we are as the people of God if we are not the church we have been. Can we structure and restructure in ways that preserve the authority of all the orders of ministry? I believe we can. And can we be clear what is unnecessary bloat and what is the inevitable messiness of our democracy? Democracy that makes possible not only our essential ministries of social justice and advocacy, but the very mission of the church of restoring all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. I find great hope in this conversation about our identity and the centrality of shared leadership in the Episcopal Church. And I think that if we keep that at the center of the restructuring conversation, and our leadership in all of the challenging times we face and all of the boundaries on which we stand, we will find the right path for our beloved church and the work God calls us to do. And finding this path, I believe, is our special vocation as Episcopalians, our messy diversity, our commitment to shared authority, and our baptismal covenant can demonstrate to a world badly in need of hope that people of faith can live a common life rooted in loving one another just as Jesus loved us. And it is in that love of Christ that we find the endless wellspring of hope. So when you're standing, and I'm going to try to catch up a little bit of our time, okay? I'm going to shorten just a tiny bit. So I'm going to make it quick. So when you're standing on the boundary between alternative possibilities of existence, how do you know how to lead? Now, I'm a big fan of David Letterman and his top 10 lists. So I've made a list, and I'm going to do them very quickly, of the top 10 traits of leaders in challenging times. And I hope that you'll enjoy not only the list, but the idea that it is possible to interpret Paul Tillich using the methodology of David Letterman. So the top 10 traits. Your life is grounded in prayer, Christian community, and spiritual practice. We all know that these practices are essential to our well-being and our effectiveness, and it's easy to fall away from listening to God. Number 9, you're working collaboratively with other bright, committed people. Remember what Jethro told Moses when he was trying to do it all? This is from Exodus 18. What you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you. For the task is too heavy for you, and you cannot do it alone. Don't forget that. Number 8, you failed a few times. As my friend and colleague Bishop Sean Rowe of Northwestern Pennsylvania says, we're looking at new models of ministry, and when we're experimenting and trying new models, we're going to fail a number of times before we succeed. So don't be afraid to try something that may not work. 7, you're focused on realizing a positive goal, not just ending something bad. I can't say that too strongly to those of you who live and serve in a reorganizing diocese. It's not just about ending something bad, it's creating the new vision of what God is calling you to be. Number 6, you have practical knowledge to complement your passion, your spiritual maturity, and your commitment. Church leaders sometimes have a hard time looking outside to the world, or outside of our walls, to see what we can learn. So seek knowledge and wisdom from people who have it, no matter where you find them, such as Pittsburgh. 5, you are looking at the glass as half full. I know it's cliche, but when you're looking for hope, it's a useful one. Number 4, you're being true to yourself. As Oscar Wilde said, be yourself, everyone else is taken. 3, someone powerful disagrees with you. Maybe more than one someone. When you're on the boundary line between the old and new, it's almost inevitable that some force would like to keep you from stepping over it. 2, you're not in it to be popular. When the great Christian educator Verna Dozier preached at Jane Holmes Dixon's ordination as Bishop Suffragan of Washington, she said the following to Jane, who was just the second woman ordained a bishop in the Episcopal Church. She said, every leader in Christian community most often wants one thing, said Verna to Jane. They want desperately to be loved. Jane Holmes Dixon, you must find that place in you that wants desperately to be loved and let it die. And the number one sign that you are leading well in challenging times is that you find your unity not in agreement, i.e. uniformity, already mentioned, but that you find your unity in Jesus Christ. Please know that I admire you. I pray for you daily and believe with all my heart that you are on the right and true path. Thank you for what you have done and continue to do to defend, preserve, and strengthen the Episcopal Church in South Carolina. Thank you.